Lovely. All right. So let us begin. So I just want to say welcome and thank you to our panelists who are all very busy focusing-oriented therapists for sharing their time with us today. And I'm just going to mute us all just for the moment. So anyone wants to share, they need to unmute. Okay. So we have Lynn. Lynn, I wonder if you could give us a wave. There we have Lynn. Lynn Preston, who's been learning and teaching focusing-oriented therapy since she met Jean in the early 70s and has developed the relational side of focusing. And she integrates FOT with relational psychoanalysis and calls it FOT. And we also have Rob Parker. Rob, if you could give, there he is, yeah, Rob Parker. And he facilitates many groups exploring Jean's philosophy of the implicit and is currently my Sherpa on this journey. I know you do many other things, Rob, but that's the way I know you the best. We have Sergio Lara. Sergio, if you could, there we go, Sergio Lara, thank you, who teaches the experiential approach to postgraduates as well as to FOT therapists in Chile. And Isabel Adon. Isabel, if you could give us a wave. Isabel, there we go. And Isabel is an Afro-Latina who's been practicing focusing since 2008. And she focuses on inclusion and multicultural attitude. And Akira Ikemi, who we all know, yes, who was a student of Jean's at Chicago and is currently a professor of psychotherapy and has written many books and articles on focusing both in Japanese and English. Thank you. Thank you very much for being with us today. So before we start, I'm going to do an attunement in a minute for us all, but before we start, I just wanted to say just a couple of things. One thing that always struck me about Jean is, and about focusing and FOT, is that Jean didn't want us to be like him. There are many other therapeutic approaches where the students try and be as close to their founder's protocol and practice as possible. But Jean was different. He wanted us to take these organic steps of finding something. And these steps enable us to move forward and become more of who we really are. And so each of us, the being and expressing more of who we are is what Jean is hoping for. So each of us is this very unique expression of our culture, our time on earth, language, education, family experiences, genetic expression, and the list can go on and on and on in so many dimensions. And so as if each therapist takes our focusing steps in the one interaction of what we all are, each of us will carry ourselves and our practice forward in our very unique ways. And so that's why today I've invited our wonderful panel of focusing-oriented therapists, each of whom are carrying their work and themselves forward in their own very unique ways. And as we know, the beauty of focusing is that it can be incorporated into any therapeutic modality. And so the big question for us today is what makes us identify ourselves as focusing-oriented therapists? How are we different from therapists who wouldn't identify themselves as having a focusing orientation? What's different about the way we work and perceive our practice? So I'm just going to start with an attunement for all of us to do today to maybe evoke something there. So we'll do our attunement, and then I was going to ask each of the panelists to talk for maybe 10 minutes about what came for them. And then maybe for about half an hour after that for the panelists to just have an open forum, a discussion. And then I'm going to invite you guys, our students, to say maybe what came for them or questions and comments. Okay, just any questions before I start. All right, okay. So let's just take a couple of minutes just to kind of settle in. So maybe just taking a moment to land. Just feeling the weight of your body on the chair. And your feet on the floor. Doing whatever fits for you there. We all have our own ways of tuning in there. Maybe just noticing your breath. How you are there in your throat and your chest and your belly. Maybe just noticing how the rhythm of the body, of a feeling level, it's a slower kind of rhythm, not every day. And if it's hard to tune in, just noticing what's hard about that, what's the quality of that experience. As you notice and keep company there, maybe just holding the question, what is it that makes you a focusing oriented therapist? What is it that makes you a focusing oriented therapist? How does focusing orient you? How does focusing help you find yourself as a therapist? What is the most important part, or the essence of FOT that gives you a sense of how to respond and how to be? What is that difference between you and another therapist who isn't a focusing oriented therapist? And just lastly, what's unique about your practice and your particular approach to FOT? What's unique to your practice? You're moving forward as a therapist. And just coming back when you're ready, and you may want to take A couple of notes there about what came. And then I wondered, for our students, would you mind just for now turning your cameras off? So we just have the panelists, just for now. There we go. So, Isabel, would you be okay starting us off? So you need to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm unmuted.
There we go. Spotlight.
Wow. I just want to say thank you for that wonderful attunement. It's just beautiful and it really took me to a place of really getting in touch with why do I do this work? Which so often I think that because I am so caught up in the day-to-day experience of the work that I do, it's so easy to forget like why I do this work, and the beauty that doing this work bring. And so the piece that really resonated for me of the attunement in what you ask was, what is the essence that gives me a sense of who I am? What is the essence of that? And what came up for me, very similar to what you started to talk about, was this sense of being a tapestry of many different threads that come together to form a whole. And so now that I'm, in essence, that I'm not one thing or another, and I think for me, as a Latina and a woman of color, a lesbian, a parent, an immigrant, a lot of times it can be about one piece and not the other, one piece taking center stage while another piece gets left behind. But really what came up for me was the beauty in being who I am, just as I am, and really integrating all parts of myself. And the other piece that I connected to was, Lynn, the video that was shared with the young person that you were working with, and that experience of that duality, and how beautifully you brought that young person to look at the duality of almost seeing herself in the, what I would say was the depressive kind of way, in which she's also mothering herself and encouraging herself to do things, and in the gentle way in which you work with that. But coming back to the essence of who I am, and in this work, it's really being able to do this work in a way that is collective, that is not just the individual, and really understanding that healing is not just about the person sitting in the room in front of me at that moment of time, but that there's just this collective energy that as that person heals, so do other people around that person, and just that essence um, of we are all together in this. And I really appreciate, Charlo, what you say about um, Gene and his invitation to us being who we are rather than emulating him and trying to be who he was. Because I think that that's such a beautiful invitation to really find and connect to who we are and how we do this work, and not to be so concerned with wanting to be someone else. Um, and sometimes that's hard. Sometimes that's hard. That sometimes it's difficult for me. I have many teachers and, many people who have held my hand through this work. And I admire all of them and I want to be like them, right? And how do I find myself in the midst of all that and still stay connected to the essence of who I am and what I bring? So I don't know if this is even making sense, but it's what is arising for me. Um, the other piece that I think that you say, and I really um, was really attracted to that, and that is what not what separates me or makes me different from, but as a focusing oriented therapist, what is it that I bring that may be of a different quality? And I think that one of the things that I bring as a person, both in my, individual practice as a psychotherapist and in my day-to-day work with the young people that I work with, is this personal connection. I think that focusing is the one. I don't want to say it's the one or the only, but it's the place where I feel that when you're working with someone, that there is a connection, that's a felt sense that even when the person is working on their own stuff, quote unquote, that there's almost a way in which you yourself are working on something. Um, and that I find that is beautiful. So it's not that you teaching or helping someone, but it's this interconnectedness that takes place. And I have to say, for me, the other piece that I bring and that I am very grateful to have come in contact with is Aboriginal focusing oriented therapists. It's that piece, and forever grateful to Shirley Turcot, that encompasses and integrates the cultural aspect that sometimes are not really as present, and also the intergenerational pieces and the historical pieces, and all of those pieces that for many people of color are so present and sometimes understated. But to me, that's another piece that I bring, that piece around working with the land and really working as a collective and working with um, not just the person sitting in front of me, but really understanding that you're working with sometimes a whole community. So that. And I'm just going to leave it at that. And Charlotte, thank you so much for this opportunity and that attunement. And here's one more piece I want to add, Lynn, um, which is speak to the piece about what separates me or identify me, or what do I bring to the table. And that is, when you were working with that young person, one of the pieces that came up was grief, and the grief of losing the grandmother. And in IFOT, that piece would have been a piece that would have been worked with and explored even deeper in terms of the intergenerational connection, and maybe even exploring if the grandmother was there to move the action forward. So that's another piece that is a piece that I really enjoy, that you get to work with people who may not even be alive. So that's really beautiful. Thank you. And I would just now take a bow and allow you guys to do your thing.
Isabel, thank you. So heartful. Thank you very much. Akira, would you be okay going next? Oh,
Okay.
And if necessary, I'll just give you 1 minute warning. So we'll have 10 minutes and I'll give you a minute warning.
Yes, please, because I might have a lot to say. Well, thank you for inviting me to come to this panel, and this looks like a wonderful panel. I'm looking forward to it. I might start off by saying I don't do very much focusing in therapy. I do a lot of things, but I am mindful of Jenlin's critique of the single theory or single technique system, as if a single theory or a single technique or single method can address all of human suffering, which is impossible, of course. So we must be careful to say that focusing can work for everything, you know. And Jenlin also wrote in the book Focusing Oriented Therapy, and this is a very famous quote: the relationship is most important, listening second, and focusing comes third only. So the relationship, as I see it, is very important. And if you look at the Jenlin's case, which he has some verbatim records in the book Focusing Oriented Therapy, you don't see him give any focusing instructions. He only gives a little bit, like just step back, or let's have a cup of tea. That kind of, more or less like creating a space. But in one part where he talks a little bit about stepping back, he writes a footnote saying that's too much focusing instructions. So he didn't give focusing instructions in therapy. And I'm careful with giving focusing instructions because instructions always changes the nature of the relationship. One tends to become directive when you have a set of instructions. So a long time ago, I was concerned with the fact that although we as therapists want to be client-centered, many of the clients want to be doctor-centered. So it is very easy for the clients to follow directions or instructions. And it has a danger that we can be obsessed with the instructions and how wonderfully or beautifully they worked out. And then we miss out on where the client was at. So I'm sensitive to where the client was at. Gene wrote about Carl Rogers, who he worked with for a long time. And Rogers thought that any person's experience was understandable from inside. So Rogers really listened attentively. And I think this is very much at the core of Rogers and Jenlin. And so, having said all that, I still believe that I'm a focusing-oriented therapist, although I don't give focusing instructions at all, because I think about this basic principle. And one of the basic principles, and this is very interesting for me, is how Carl Rogers and Jenlin worked together very well for a long time, even though Jenlin made focusing. And the answer is quite simple. They always collaborated because if you read Carl Rogers, he's always writing from the viewpoint of the therapist. So it's the therapist that does client-centered therapy. It's the client, it's the therapist that does that listens non-directively. It's the therapist empathy. It's the therapist unconditional positive regard. Therapist congruence. So Rogers is talking from a therapist's point of view. And Jenlin doesn't talk from there. He talks about what the client does. And he says focusing is the crucial inner act that the client is doing. So the two are actually working on different sides of the same coin. Rogers is emphasizing what the therapist does. And Jean Jenlin is writing about what happens to the client, or what happens in the client's experiencing. And so, as a therapist, I want the clients to get in touch with this crucial inner act, which is focusing. I want to promote the client to do the focusing. And in that way, I think I'm a focusing-oriented therapist. I help the person contact the felt sense. Sometimes I say, how does all this feel for you? Oh, another thing I might say is, how does all this feel for you in your body? And by body, I mean a relationship. It's a living forward of a relationship. Oftentimes the body in focusing is confused with the physical body. But Jean doesn't mean the physical body. He says it's a living with others. It's our embodied being in the world. And he says it is not, quotes, the area within the skin envelope. So it's not the inside of the skin that he's talking about, but it's a kind of a bodily living forward. So if you have a bodily sense of this panel right now, it's your relationship to this panel, or it's your wanting to live in such a way with this panel. So I emphasize the felt sense, the bodily feel, and space also. I can talk a lot about space, but I don't have the time. And what I also value is what I call the openness of not knowing. So we don't know what the felt sense is going to turn out to be. And we value that openness of not knowing. And from there, I think I can say two things, which is that focusing is actually a mode of reflecting upon experience. And we want the clients to reflect upon how they're living or how they live a situation. The EXP scale, which is a very important measure, and I think it's very important to train for listening. But actually, I think the EXP scale is measuring how we can reflect on experience. So this self-reflection, I think, is very important that the client does. We want the clients to reflect on themselves. And also, another important thing that distinguishes focusing from whatever else there is that saying always carries forward what one wanted to say. So this is the very essence of, I think, Jenlin's philosophy, actually, that we don't really know what it is. It's unformulated, what it is. We might say, I am angry at that person. And the moment we say I am angry, we notice it's not anger. It's a kind of fear, maybe. And the moment we say fear, we notice that it's not fear, really. And then you realize, oh, maybe I'm feeling hurt. So saying always changes what we wanted to say. And I think that is very important, that we listen and assume that everything that the client is saying is tentative. And it is always a process that unfolds as we speak. So in those ways, I think that I'm really close to what Zenlin said or wrote in his philosophy and in his psychotherapy. I also blend in my own twist, which is about mindfulness.
1 more minute.
Yeah, well, I have 1 minute.
Yes, 1 minute.
Okay, and I did talk about this to your class about Kanga, so I won't speak about it today. One more thing I might want to say is Jean and I used to talk a lot about language because all of this is very much linguistic. And he speaks German, and he spoke German and English. I speak Japanese and English. And a different person comes out when we speak a different language. So language is very important. And yeah, let's leave it at that. Language is a very important thing. And what we do very much in focusing is linguistic, I think.
Right.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Akira, thank you very much. It's a lot.
You.
That's wonderful. Sergio, would you be okay going next? Lovely. And again, Sergio, I'll give you a 1 minute warning, so at 9 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I am very honored to be here in this panel. It's a wonderful idea. Congratulations. Yes. When I heard, I listened to Akira, I do work permanently in the direction of focusing in my practice. And I think I began as a kid because I wanted to be always in the nature and in touch with the silence and with the wind. And so that was my experience as a kid. And after that, I was some years in medicine school. And then I quit that. And I was for many years in a place of silence. So my way of education of focusing was through my life, what I lived. And I was very insecure when I was a psychology student. And I wanted to see Eugene Gendlin. So I traveled to USA in 2000. And it was in a congress of the conference of last millennium in Anaheim, California. And I was there and I saw him, and it was a presentation of focusing. And I say myself, oh, I didn't understand maybe the English, but I didn't see that Gene Gendlin did focusing. And I was very surprised of myself. And after that, some people asked him, and a psychologist asked him, why did you not do focusing in this session? And I say myself, oh, yeah, I understand good. And Gene Gendlin said, do you know, more important than do focusing is to make companion to another. And this person didn't want to do focusing, so I didn't do it. And for me, I said myself, oh gosh, this is what I want, to be free, to make companion without a structure. And when I and the second thing that I listened of Jim Genlin in this moment was another question of another person, and she said, "What do you say new in psychotherapy?" Because Carl Rogers had said all. What do you say? And Jim Genlin said only two words: the body, the body. And so when I study and when I do classes at the university, I noticed that Jim Genlin meditated many years about Dilthey, Merleau-Ponty, Heidegger, and others. And so the word that he translated of German is das Leib, and das Leib in German is the body, the existential body. German had two words for body, so it wasn't easy to do it in English, but he has the both languages now, and so I think when I do my practice, I am in touch with this body and with this soul and body together. So I work permanently in the direction of life. And I think an attitude of living and showing it. For me, it comes in a new way of thinking that Jim points. And what is a very big point for me is the interaction that is first for all. And the interaction that makes me define myself with another. And so life manifests itself in this interaction. I wanted to share something that I have read and is of my meditation on this day, and it is a thinking of Michel Foucault, and he said that our epoch is a time of space, the time of the fence and the distance from side to side of the dispersed. And in this way, we can think that the place versus time in understanding the city, that is the thinking of Foucault. But for me, remember a thinking of Jim Genlin that I heard in a conference about the complexity and inevitability of being citizen in the current city. And I think what I think about that, it is that we live within in a network of relationships that delineate places that are irreducible to each other and absolutely impossible to superimpose. For me, that makes that we, in this moment, in this time, we must look a new way to go to the persons. Because it's not only the objective, it's not only a symptom, it's not only something that we have to take from the person so that person feel well. Is how to live in this jungle. I seen the subway of 10 person, 9 with the iPhones and with the supposed connected with the network, but disconnected with the life. The people talk about the intimate things without problems, loud in the subway, loud in the buses. So we have a new time. And I think for me, the challenge is how to be in touch with this challenge of the people, and to be in touch with the life. And so I think this new epistemology of Xinjiang opens to me a door to work with the body, to work with the felt sense, to work with what the people need. Because in this supposed connected network world, we are in loneliness. And I saw in my consult this problem always.
Just one more minute.
Thank you. That the people are looking for the solution, how to decide between two things, always. But when we go to invite our clients to be in touch with the body, with the felt sense, and with the life, it comes the creative solution and the positive way that is not my way, is the way of the life. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So I can't see Rob. I wonder if Rob. Lynn, are you there? I know she's moving stuff out of her house.
I think she might have stepped out, but she probably will be right back. I don't see Rob either. I don't know if he got dropped.
Maybe he got dropped. Let me just check. Give me 1 second. I will just put this in. Let me just unmute Lynn. Lynn.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you well.
There's somebody mowing the lawn outside, so I went to see if I could get them to stop, but couldn't find them easily. Let me know if this is better now when I put this on.
Actually, Lynn, it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah?
I can't hear the noise.
Okay, so we're okay.
We're good.
Okay, good. All right, I just lost you for a minute. There we go. Okay. I've been so enjoying this panel so far. Wow. I'm just taking in what everybody else said and getting reoriented about what I would have to say, because I think we're all playing off of each other in a wonderful way. I was thinking about how when the first focusing paper that I wrote was called Two Interwoven Miracles. And at that time, I was enchanted with the idea that the miracle of finding something inside, unfolding it, and it talking back. It's an amazing, amazing miracle. That the miracle that we can attune ourselves to a part of ourselves, or an aspect or a dimension of ourselves that's just beneath the surface. And that when we find the right ways of allowing it to speak, that it speaks to us, that we get to participate in our own growth. We don't need an expert to interpret what's unconscious. We can find the inklings, the feel of it, and allow it to speak. That miracle, coupled with the miracle of how therapy, even when we're seeing the person only once or twice a week, can make an incredible difference, a new beginning, a new healing, and that we are able to together have an incredible transformation. And then the way that I talked about it in the paper was that I discovered that these two miracles are really one miracle. They're two sides of the same coin. That we can find this larger self, but this larger self isn't only a static, individual, separate entity. This larger self is our interaction with others. We are this interaction. And so the self that we find is the self that's in relation. The self that Isabel is reminding us goes back to our ancestors and also forward to future generations of anticipation and way out to the whole zeitgeist that we belong to. And so that idea of these two interwoven miracles has been something that I've been passionate about for so many years. But then I realized today, when I was thinking about doing this panel, that I would like to add to the miracles. The third miracle, which is really implied in the first two, is that life wants more life. As Jean put it, every bit of human experience has an inherent forward movement implicit in it. It's right there. And that third miracle keeps me on track as a therapist when I'm threatened or scared or despairing, like, oh no, this is happening to this person. This person is so overwhelmed. This person is so dead inside. Or that every bit of human experience has an inherent forward movement embedded in it, and that all we need to do is to hear it. And the implied forward movement, the possibilities, the direction that it wants to go in is right there. And we can tune into it. We can support it. Even the most horrible things that we experience in life are things that have opportunities, even opportunities for protest, or opportunities to know that this is not the way life should be. And just knowing it shouldn't be that way. That was a question that Jean asks in therapy. How should it have been? It should not have been that your father abused you. How should it have been? That we can get in our bodies a way that life would have it to be. And then we get to live it in some way in the moment. And the fourth miracle that I want to add, I've been understanding newly recently, and that's the miracle of the focusing attitude. And Joan Klagsborn sort of laughs about, well, it's not just a focusing attitude, it's this big attitude. the attitude of receptivity and curiosity, and an attitude of the kind of sacredness of life that Jean embodied. And what I'm understanding more and more is that not only do we need this attitude in order to connect with our larger selves, the one in there, the big thing in us, the body self, but that taking an attitude that we can embrace this attitude of openness, and that openness is something that we have some input about, not like a feeling that just comes. We can't say, well, feel this way or that way, but we can say, embody an attitude in this moment of curiosity. It can be something that we have input into. And focusing actually not only requires this attitude of receptivity, but it fosters it, so that when we go inside, when we pause, when we say, well, what is that there? What am I feeling? It actually generates this attitude of curiosity and openness. And the other thing that I'm understanding about the importance of attitude is that attitude is the invisible, larger container of the whole thing. Attitude is like the air we're breathing. Attitude is what we don't even notice, that makes the huge difference about what kind of forward movement can occur. And what I'm learning is that focusing enables us to have this attitude. The attitude enables us to focus, but that the attitude, embodying that attitude, makes therapy healing. It gives us fresh air. It's the oxygen that gives us fresh air and brings new life to something. It's the company that is the kind of company that we then feel hope and not alone. And we feel connected, which is one of the most important, or the most important thing. You know, we are, when we think about what Jean says about we are interaction, we're made out of this connectedness. But we don't always feel connected. It's like the sun is always there, but we don't see it when there are clouds all over the place. So this feeling connected is the key, I think, that goes with this attitude of receptivity and openness. I'm just going to close this door. I'll be right back in a second. So,
Lynn,
yeah.
One more minute.
Oh, one more minute. Oh, dear. I've just begun. No, the last minute I want to spend on the unique way that focusing oriented therapy has come to me, and that is to spell out more the implications in practice for the basic understanding that we are interaction. Jean says our primary job as therapists is to be the kind of interaction that makes something better. And I see that not as separate from focusing. I see that as a larger way of talking about focusing. Focusing isn't only that inner act that is done with our eyes closed, but that in touchness, that referencing what's there, not only in our individual selves, but in the interaction. And I developed ways of talking about what I call the felt sense of the us, that we are one interaction, Jean says, and that we can have a felt sense, not only as therapists of ourselves and of the client, but we can have a felt sense of the system, a felt sense of the us. And we can be informed by what we as partners are ready for. Is this kind of self-expression that I want to do, is that going to be right? Is it going to carry something forward for me to give this client who is crying a hug, or to put my hand on his shoulder? Is it going to be right for me to introduce focusing in a more instructive way and say, can we spend a moment with that? Can you see what comes from that in the midst of our interaction? I can feel the readiness, not only of the client, but the readiness for us, the readiness for the two of us, for this team, to move forward in certain ways. Did I do it in a minute, Charlotte?
Good, very good.
Oh, good.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you, Lynn. And so, Rob, are you ready? How's your connection?
I think my audio is good. Can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
Okay, so I've been doing audio troubleshooting, and so I missed some of Sergio and Lynn's presentations. But I went inside and thought about, well, what is it about that distinguishes my practice and FOT from other approaches that I know? And it feels to me that the most important thing, distinguishing thing, is humility. And others have thought of that, so that's not completely distinguishing. So I also want to say that I think FOT gives us better ways of being humble than others, so we can be humble more, better than others can be. So what do I mean by that? And I don't want to say like really better than others, but we have some good ways of being humble. What do I mean? Well, we live in a society that assumes that it knows what's best, and the only concern is having enough power or control to make what's best happen. And so I saw an ad just the other day that was offering a way to rewire and reprogram my brain so that I could be more efficient or sleep less or something. And it raised a question, like, if my brain is a piece of hardware that can be reprogrammed and I am a manifestation of that hardware, then who's doing the reprogramming, right? And and also, like, on what basis would one decide that one's brain needs to be reprogrammed? And yet we hear that kind of language all the time. Also, the brain is hardwired to do this or that, or you can change the wiring of your brain to accomplish this or that. It's like an assumption that we know what needs to be done, and so what the advertising or what the technique is going to do is give us the power to accomplish what needs to be done. Without asking, like, if we are the wiring, then who's changing the wiring? And has anybody noticed that there actually are no wires inside the brain? Another example, a psychiatrist that I know told me that a large part of his practice, he lives on the outskirts of Manhattan, is prescribing amphetamines to the Wall Street traders that brought down the world economy in 2008. And so they know what needs to be done. They know they need to work harder, faster, spend more hours. And So it's a solution-oriented technological society where everything is in front of us is a potential tool for doing something faster, better, cheaper. And who decides what should be done and who decides what's a problem? If the Wall Street trader is tired or depressed, is that a problem? Or and maybe is that a gift that that person should be listening to and maybe adjusting their life? And then faced with that kind of relativism, like who knows, we often end up saying, well, the client gets to decide, so we'll just give the Wall Street trader his or her pills because they're asking for it. And in focusing oriented therapy, we have a different way. We don't assume that we know, and we listen to the client's actual experiencing. So if someone asks for help with substance abuse, as therapists, we know there are treatment protocols for substance abuse and there are best practices for substance abuse. And we also know that those really don't work very well. The outcomes are not very good. But what we can do instead is we can actually listen with the person and invite them to listen together with us, listen to their life, listen to their, what's your world like? And what we may find is a complexity and intricacy which had been sort of overlooked. It's like wallpaper. And listening to that, that says what it needs. And we can then start working on helping, guided by the client's felt sense, we can help the client make their own life better, listening to something larger than the small ego that thinks that we need to sleep less and do more. And we can put aside the concepts and techniques and categories, reprogramming the brain and so on, and just find out really that substance abuse might not be a problem at all, that it actually might be a doorway towards helping one's life. And so, like a client might realize after some time in therapy and not paying any attention at all to the substance abuse, but paying attention to making life better. The client mentions in a therapy session, oh, by the way, I realized like 2 weeks ago that alcohol wasn't really doing anything for me, and it really was creating more problems than it was solving. So I stopped drinking, and now I'd like to talk more about the other stuff that we've been doing. So it's like in passing, that thing. I've been drinking since I was 14, and now I'm 50, and I just stopped. But not a big deal. The really big deal is that I'm going to meet with friends, and I'm finding a new job that feels right to me, and I'm doing all of that because I decided, or I don't know, I felt, I realized that there's a larger ground which I didn't know about. And I learned to listen to that. So gradually dealing with various wallpaper problems, and then gradually finding out that the substances are no longer so attractive. And I think that approach requires humility on our part, and requires also humility in the client. Like, neither of us really know what's best. We need to listen to something larger, a still, quiet voice inside that knows more than we do, knows better, has a larger understanding. And I think that approach, that referring to something larger, is deeply needed in our technological society. Um, and it goes against the grain of a lot of therapies. Like a lot of what we're taught in school these days is techniques to do things. And if we're dealing with third-party payers, they want to hear about what's the presenting problem and then how long it's going to take to fix it. And you get the feeling that they would rather have somebody work on a presenting problem such as like substance abuse. We'll send them off to a residential treatment center for 3 months, and that'll cost a fortune, but it's focused, directive, the sort of medical model, unit model treatment. And if we're just listening and making life better, and that works in a maybe a shorter time or a similar amount of time, yeah, and they actually stop abusing substance, that's not as good because you didn't have a treatment plan that was going through steps and doing stuff. It seems to me the whole concept of treatment plan assumes that we know what we're doing, and we shouldn't.
Rob, just 1 minute.
Yeah. So one of my teachers, who was also a student of Rogers, said once, if you think you know what you're doing, you're probably doing the wrong thing. And so my sense is that what focusing brings is a sense of not knowing and a sense of humility, and also a better ground, because I think we've got a way of getting in touch with a larger knowing that other therapies or other approaches. I think we have I don't want to say a better way or something, but it's in a way it is better. And, so that's it. I think it's humility, and I think we do it better.
Lovely, thank you, Rob. Yes, and just before I open it up to discussion, I just in that interaction that we all are, just really feeling each of you, not only in the words that you were sharing, that you've been sharing, but how you are. That's one thing in this 2-year course that I facilitate. The beauty of having different teachers, feedback I've always got from my students is it's not only the teaching, but it's the way each teacher embodies their teaching, their way of being. So just really feeling affected and impacted by each of your ways of being and what you're sharing. Thank you. And I would just like to add one small thing, one short thing, which is implicit in, and also each of you have kind of shared this in your own way. But for me, one of the central pieces is what you were articulating, Rob, that humility, that trust, that, in realizing and going to all these focusing kind of conferences and events, that, everybody feels so beautiful. There's such a lovely experience here, everybody. And actually what it is everybody is trusting this level, this humility, this giving yourself over to this level. That's what's so beautiful in each person. And that in FOT, it's almost more important that you as a therapist are the one who's in touch and focusing. And Lynn, you've often spoken about this your orientation. It's like when you're feeling lost in the woods and the thickets in sessions, you can always trust, you can always go to this level, and it will very organically, the trust in that will lead you both through and guide you both through. And so you as a focusing oriented therapist, to be in that, in touch with that feeling sense, that felt sense, that experience of the one interaction that you are, and experiencing it from your own particular being, and being oriented and following that and inviting the client to that level is what feels one of the most important things for me. So guys, let's if I could open this up. Akira, are you still okay? Are you still you're bearing up? Good. So,
Yes, it's still there.
thank you, good. So maybe I could just start by opening the floor to all of us, to all of you. There could be something that someone else has shared that kind of sparked something for you, or another thought that's come for you. And we could maybe have like 20, 30 minutes there. Who would like to maybe come in here? Akira.
I just wanted to add something. I liked what everybody said, and I want to share a lot, but I just wanted to add one thing to what Rob said. I feel that in many other therapies, the body is regarded as an object, not the subject.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
People want to control the body
Exactly.
as if it is an object, but they don't listen to the body as if it were a subject.
Right. Right.
And the same thing happens with the mind too.
Mm-hmm.
That they want to control the mind.
That's
then
right.
the mind becomes the object and not the subject. So what we're doing is actually to reinstall the subjective, the subject,
Right.
which is our body and which is our mind, which is our being or existence.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah. And I'd like to add there that some therapies also refer to the body, like Pat Ogden's sensory motor psychotherapy and others, and they tend to do it in a formulaic way. And I think the what's going on is that Jean's philosophy and focusing is about meaning creating. And meaning creating leads to lots of good ideas and lots of good formulas. And then sometimes people get stuck on whatever new formula they've found. Instead of going back to that we can do this, we can create 6 formulas during a therapy session. Yeah.
So thank you both, Akira and Rob. I think one thing that struck me as a Spanish-speaking person, both when Akira spoke and when Sergio also spoke, is this conversation around language. And I think it's not only language in terms of the words and the meaning of words, but this felt sense that just keep changing and emerging throughout the conversation. And one of the things that I find really beautiful in the work that I engage in is that I work with people who are Spanish speaking, and English is their second language. And there are times when we are engaged in a very deep conversation in English, and all of a sudden that's the person may say, I really need to say this in Spanish, because there's a sense or a felt sense that they have in their body about this that is very different if they use a word in English. And it's just so beautiful to see that. And also the other thing that I often encounter, because I work also with young people, is that language also sometimes is not important. So it is both important and not important. That there's something that can be said through the body and even through the physical body expression that doesn't have words, and that's okay too. So thank you both, Sergio, and I love your story of you coming to the States and being in the conference and being like, is it me or is they really not talk about that? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, Lynn, you were putting. And then I'll come to you, Sergio. Oh, hang on a sec, Lynn. Let me unmute you. Oh, right. You're unmuted.
I am.
Yes.
Oh, I wanted to comment on this idea of the not knowing, the humility, and this phrase that a psychoanalyst uses, courting surprise, which I love. And I feel like a focusing orientation is that edge of awareness where we're always courting meaning wooing, bringing, inviting the surprise of what we don't know, and trusting that that surprise of what's right at that edge of awareness is going to bring us something. It's going to speak to us. So I love that. And I wanted to comment about the Sergio's use of the term the existential body, which is a lovely term, really, that we're not talking about something that's purely physical or purely, we're not chopping up the person into the physical and mental or emotional, but it's that body that is the unity of the person and the environment. And I like to think of the term body also in the way when we talk about the body politic or the body of the group, that the body isn't something that's cut off and separated from other bodies, that we have a body here together in this panel. We are the body of this panel along with the students who are watching us, and that we can tune into that body. Oh, also just one more thing about language. I love hearing about how you use language and how language, one philosopher said language is the house that humans live in. That language has a very important role in being a handle or a way of explicating what is known in the body but not put into words, and then those words carry it forward, and then the zigzag is then we find the larger from the words, but the particular words of particular languages carry it forward in a different way and can be handled very uniquely for something like that idea of the existential body, which I hadn't heard that term before.
Thank you, Lynn. Sergio, let me just unmute you.
Yeah. Yes, it's a wonderful conversation. I love that. I wanted to add only something that at the university always we talk about the knowledge and how we show the knowledge and the truth. And in a place of psychotherapy, we talk about the knowledge and the truth too, of myself, of being. And in modernity, we talk about the objective, and the science clarified that very well. With the time, we give more importance to the first person, and the research has increased a lot with focusing. But I think the biggest contribution of focusing is the second person. I mean, the interaction between me and you, and how this knowledge comes to us as a new interaction, a fresh interaction, where we can create a new knowledge of ourselves. And for me, that is wonderful.
That's so profound. Lynn, let me unmute you. There we go, you're unmuted.
I'm appreciating how all of these ideas and experiences are fitting together. There's a kind of organic interweaving and fit that each aspect sort of fills out some other aspect in a deeper way. That whole sense of what we mean by interaction, and it reminds me that that Jean and I over the years had many dialogues, sometimes debates, sometimes actual arguments about the emphasis of the relationship and the emphasis of, you know, focusing on the individual client. And in one of those bouts of discussing this, he sent me an email about the three meanings of interaction, and I'd be very happy to send that to you if people are interested in it. How he sort of summarized the three dimensions of interaction.
Yeah.
That would be lovely.
Yes. And I've been studying with Lynn for a long time, and I've learned so much. It's, and at the heart of what I've learned is, in a really trusting this level, is the felt sense of the one interaction that we are this one interaction that's in constant interaction with a whole big everything. And Rob, obviously I'm expanding that in my studies with you of the philosophy of the implicit, and getting a really lovely experience of understanding and experiencing that. But that in that, as you were mentioning, Lynn, that it's possible, it's to bring your attention to different dimensions of that one interaction, whether it's your own felt sense of you with the client, your felt sense of the client's felt sense, or the felt sense of the interaction itself, and how each place where you bring your attention, and I'm sure there are many infinite places you could, but in choosing those, such different information, obviously interrelated, and different information comes, and these different points where you can work from and understand is beautiful to me. It feels like, you know, this kind of four-dimensional experience with another and of oneself. And it's also what I so love in teaching focusing, in being a focusing oriented therapist, and teaching focusing, that it's just so endlessly life-giving and profound in its experience. I just wanted to bring in one other thing. I was actually, Nada Lou did a recording of an FOT panel many years ago, and Lynn, you were in that panel, and was at the first FOT conference, and many lovely things were said there. And Jim Iberg said something about how often what wants to be carried forward is shy. And so focusing is such a beautiful and perfect way of carrying those shy places forward, that these other ways that you're talking about and that you laid out so beautifully, Rob, and articulated, can feel those shy places are very shy of those agendas. And the instructions, Akira, that you were talking about, that focusing is such a lovely invitation to those shy places. Lynn. Oh, hang on, let me just unmute you. There we go, you're on.
What you said reminded me that I wanted to comment on what Akira said about how we want to be non-directive, but that the client wants to be we want to be client-centered, but the client wants to be doctor-centered. and that 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 sense that we can be non-directive in our directiveness, if you know what I mean. That when the client wants to be directed, wants to be guided, wants to be helped, there's a hunger, a stuck interaction there of not having had that experience and wants that. Then if we respond to that, we're responding to this us, like I have something to guide, and the person has this hunger for guidance that maybe they never got. And then I can be the interaction that makes something better by guiding, but I'm really still client-centered because I'm responding to what that one in there is needing from me or wanting from me. And it's not the little me that knows best, that Rob Park is talking about, right? That says, oh, I have one of those too, that comes up all the time, and I put them aside. It's not the little one the little Lynn that knows what's best, but it's the Lynn that's in tune with the body of this interaction that says guiding is what is needed here right now. And I can speak for that. I can be that. I can represent that. I'm a representative of that. It's not the little me that's guiding.
It also makes me think of Shirley Turcott's approach, which can look very directive because she points out correctly that trauma is mute and can't speak. And so you have to speak for it. And so she will move in looks like gangbusters and be very directive. And yet she's not. It's still client-centered, but therapist-driven. And with every intervention, which can look directive, there's a moment, a pause and checking, like, how did that feel and what was the response? Mm-hmm. And if it didn't resonate, and if the body doesn't speak back, I guess that's the thing. Mm-hmm. If the body doesn't speak back, then you just drop it and you go on to something else because the body knows better.
I like that, Rob, when you say the body can speak back, because that's the real difference from focusing guiding to something else.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Where the body doesn't speak back. Like when you're giving some relaxation instructions or something like that, the body doesn't speak back. Mm-hmm. Focusing it does, and we're attentive to what the body says. Mm-hmm. In that way, we're giving instructions, but we're still listening.
We're still listening, yeah.
Right, that's right. So we're directive and non-directive. Yeah, thank you, Lynn.
Yes, and I think that's so much our challenge as focusing-oriented therapists, to be attuned to that one interaction. And obviously what we bring is so unique, us being this one interaction with all our past and our culture and stellar constellations and whatever there is at that particular moment, that we have this very unique experience of the one interaction that we're being, and to trust that. And that can enable us to be quite directive, as you're saying, Rob and Lynn, and that constant work on ourselves too, of how much can we bring in, how much is therapeutic, how can we be the interaction that makes it better, that isn't a repeat. That helps us tune into this person may be looking to us for direction as something that's needed in that moment. And can we embody that in a way that we hold that lightly, as you're saying, Rob, to be constantly checking and checking and checking, to be attuned to that and not to get too stuck in maybe something that's coming up more from our own material.
Right.
History. Mm-hmm.
I found a very reliable guide in myself is that when I can sense something, a response coming from me from my background and all the good teachers that I've had, and it feels just like the perfect therapeutic thing. That's a warning to me that I'm being clever, and just shut that down. You wait in the back room until we're done therapy. And it's really the human encounter, I think, what Isabel was pointing to.
Yeah.
That like we're here as human beings with other human beings, and just to be human.
You know, I think that I want to get back to something that I would say in terms of Jean sort of saying that there were the three pieces that were really important. It was the relationship, the listening, and focusing itself. Maybe, you know, in that order. But what comes to me is the other piece in terms of like what Akira was saying, that we bring many different techniques and experiences, and yeah, one of the most important pieces is to really just be there to listen, and as Sergio was saying, to have companionship, to really serve as a witness to this other person's experience without our own experiences becoming or taking center stage. And to me, that is beautiful. And also the piece about, you know, I know that you send out something. I'm so sorry, but now that's like a motorcycle. Charlotte, you send out something about, you know, in a relationship versus interactions with the therapist, and that I think that is also important. And I know for me, many of the people that I work with, they also want me to be present and not to just be a sounding board, because it is a interrelatedness that goes on when you're focusing with someone, or when you're bearing witness. So thank you, because I think that that's also important.
Lynn.
I recently reread Jean's chapter 11 in the focusing oriented therapy book about a unified field theory through the experiential approach or sensitivity. And I really enjoyed it. This idea that we can learn and use many different approaches, and our sensitivity to the moment of experience and to the felt sense enables us to cross from one world of theory to another world of theory, from one language or procedure to another. And that sense that being in touch with the moment of experience isn't only the experience that the client is verbalizing, but all that we're picking up in ourselves, in the client, and in the room, in the atmosphere between us, that keeps us watching the road. I think that was Jean's analogy, that listening is like watching the road, that we do many other things, you know, put our foot on the gas, steer the car, whatever, but we have to watch the road. And listening is listening to the person, listening to ourselves, listening to different dimensions of the person, and listening to the us. And then we can safely, or even sometimes gracefully, use different theories and approaches, even ones that contradict each other.
Thank you, Lynn.
It feels like the thing, like gracefully, like you say, Lynn, of having the different theories come. That can't, I don't know. In some way, it can't be done rationally. It seems it's like we have to also listen to ourselves. And there's a deeper place that knows how to do these things.
Yeah, that's right. You're listening to the felt sense.
Yeah, to our own felt sense as well as to the client.
Yeah, and to the relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
That,
And really what it comes down to, I'm curious if others have felt this way, that there's after all the training and experience and everything, really the most important thing is to do nothing, but to let the thing come, to not be in the way of the process and to facilitate the process, which means being sensitive to the process, but not to do anything, but to let the process do it. And so in a way, you'd say, well, what that means is just learning to do nothing. And you just said that is extremely difficult. And to do nothing is the kind of the flowering of like much experience and much work. Yeah. I wonder how others feel about that.
I'm incorporating some of David Rome's mindful listening. Is it listening, he calls it?
Yeah.
Listening without saying anything. Just being there and don't say anything. And I sort of combine it with, I do it like this: 12 minutes, you listen without saying anything. And then the remaining 8 minutes, this is a 20-minute thing, 8 minutes, you can say what you feel or what you understand. And then the people who attended, who did these exercises, many of them felt very good in the first 12 minutes because they were not interrupted in their flow of whatever came to them. And some of the people who did the exercise as listeners came to realize how frequently we're asking questions that are not necessary, and how a lot of times we're listening, and instead of listening, we're thinking of what we should ask or how should we respond. And that takes a lot of energy, a lot of capacity. So if you say you don't have to say anything, then you sort of dip into the person's experience. So that's a very interesting thing, to not do anything, to not say anything, and just listen. Gene has a little bit in the book Focusing where he says focusing happens with a listener who knows when and how to keep quiet. And I think there are moments that we don't really need to respond, and just to be there. Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up.
So guys, I just wanted, before we open it up to the class, I just wanted to introduce the idea of culture, the effect of culture and different cultures on FOT. And that's a tricky one because culture is are the water that we live in. And so it's hard to reflect on something that's so much a part of us. And reflecting on another culture is tricky because it's not your culture. So, but I just wanted to open that up to see if anyone had any thoughts. Sergio.
Yes, I was thinking in this moment that we are of the 9% in the world who have a warm bed, food every day, and clean water. 9% in the world. That is what we know. So we are privileged, and I think that the psychotherapy is a privilege too. In my culture or my country, I say that the health systems are oriented to achieve the efficiency and supposed effectiveness, but not always they have that. So it's a contradiction to have efficiency and not always is effectiveness, because the people come again to the symptoms. So focusing brings a new door to be deep in this change. So in my practice, when I do that in the health systems, I have to show something. And I prepare some sessions where we work with the clients to make the first change. And in research, the first change is around the fourth session, when we have an order of what is happening to the client. That is described in the research, like the first change is like to the people feel something relief about what is happening to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so focusing with the clearing space can open this door or can make a difference in the system. And the second one, the change, the research describe like to no symptoms. That means that any illness could be go down. And so I think the focusing make this difference too, because the symptoms are only a sign of something in the life, something in the existential life. So when we pay attention to that, we make a difference. So for me and for my student, I must show something to show to the health system too, because in particular consult, we can do it anything, but in the institution, we have to have a way. And I think that we can do it. We can make a difference. I remember a conference of Mary Hendricks, and I think it was in Costa Rica, but she said focusing is dangerous, because focusing make the people to be in the power and to have power, and it has political and social consequences. So I think for me it's very interesting that we are political and social worker in the world when we teach focusing, because the people can be strong with themselves and fight for whatever they need. And this is very important.
Amen.
Thank you, Sergio. And can I just echo something that you say? In some way, we both privileged because we sit here, look at this, on a Sunday morning, we able to have a Zoom meeting where people in my country, in the Dominican Republic, many don't even have electricity. And so here we are. But I wanted to speak a little bit about focusing oriented therapy in here in the United States, more specifically here in New York City. One of the things that I noticed is that for many reasons, there's not as many people of color or Latino engaged in this work. You know, and the other side of that coin is that, including here in New York City, there's at least 13% of the population that is impacted by depression. And some of that is attributed to being an immigrant, you know, adjusting to a new culture, trying to fit in. And so I guess the question then is, for me, what is culture, and what is it that we are using to define as culture? Because I do have many people who come to me and what the culture that they identify with may be LGBTIQ, it may be the Latino culture, it may be, you know, because they live in the Lower East Side culture. So it really depends. And I think that this is the part that Rob was talking about. It's really what the client brings in some way that then we work with. But I think that for me, the question is, how do we make this more accessible to other people, so they can benefit from that. Because I go to many things, and I'm a bean counter. I'm often counting how many people of color are there, and I do go to many things and don't see a large representation of African Americans and Latino and other, and forget even indigenous people of Native American. And so how can this, and I know, I wasn't a Gene student, but I know, and I have a few opportunities, but I wasn't able to see him physically, but he was able to do some stuff on the phone. And I know one of the things that he also talked about was how this is accessible to anyone. And his commitment was to sort of, like my words, bring it to the masses. And so how is it that this is not happening? How is it that this is not more broadly available to other people, and more people are learning about it? So I don't know that I have the answer to that, but it's something that I am constantly faced with.
Akira.
Yeah. I think this is a very big topic about language and culture. And language, of course, because Jenlin's experiencing is about how experiencing interacts with symbols. And language is verbal symbols. So it's very much an integral part of experiencing. Now, culture, I don't know how to really think about culture. But I remember one time in Germany, I was teaching at the summer school there, and Jean was there too. And I was telling Jean, what should I do? I don't know anything about German culture. What should I do? And then Jean said, what is human is always the same. Whether you eat with chopsticks or whether you eat with forks, knives and forks, that can differ. But the point is that you get hungry. And so what is human is essentially the same. And so I did my workshops there, and I really found that to be true. What people came up with, the problems people had, were essentially the same as what I would encounter here. But there's something about focusing that can change the culture, because how we move on from our situation is always newly created in focusing, so that something new can come up. And I think that's how the culture keeps changing, or the culture is not exactly the same all the time. And we are not, um, what should I say, constricted by culture. We are creating the culture. And I think in that sense, it's political, or it has power because it has power to change. And so I think culture is always changing, and I think focusing can contribute to changing it in more diverse ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Akira. I remember, I think, is it in the process model where Jean talks about focusing being the next step in human evolution? It's just a kind of a step on from what you're saying there.
I just want to appreciate, the issue of how we bring focusing to different cultures, especially in New York, as Isabella is saying, that we have so few people of color. And I think that one of the things that we're trying in New York is having these learn focusing programs that are a kind of pay it forward, where people are not paying with money, but paying by teaching other people. And that's sort of a political as well as social message, that this isn't just about making money, and that people have responded so well to that idea. So that I think what we do, or how we do it, is giving some message of inclusiveness, and it's taken me a long time to sort of see that I could do that. It never occurred to me before to have a program like that. But I also wanted to say that culture is a thing sort of like attitudes, that is the things that we take for granted, that we don't see, that are shaping our experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's implicit rather than explicit. And we make a culture with our clients. We have a culture in a group. We make a culture, and we can be very sort of sensitive to what is the culture that we're helping to facilitate or make, and how are other people contributing to that culture. It seems like a dimension that we have to focus on more.
Thank you. Sergio, oh, I know Rob wanted to say. Rob, did you want to?
Just that the part of the problem with bringing psychotherapy to the people is that psychotherapy costs money. And so I think Lynn's approach of some type of payback where they teach others, payback in kind, I guess, is important. And also Shirley's AFOT, where she has sort of modules where she can take somebody from an indigenous culture and within a certain amount of time can have them functioning as a therapist in an indigenous situation. So they don't need licensing or anything. They're able to help people. And also the focusing institutes, just teaching focusing. If people know how to focus, they can do that without paying anybody any money, and they get a ground inside themselves. So all of that.
Sergio.
Yes, this is a very big topic. I think it's very interesting. I remember an axiom of Jim Gendlin that it was in a paper: situation equal body equal language. And this is very important because it's not a comparison, it's a comparison, it's a equality. And what I always see when I travel is our ethnocentrisms and the tendency of the people to think that all is like in their own country. But in this moment, we are living something that is very interesting because we build the culture, as Akira say, and she builds us too, or the culture built us too. And in this moment, I think that the network and the connections makes that the borders disappear and the interactions appear with strong. So when we make this place of psychotherapy, we make a place of interaction, culture in our bodies. And this does make a very big difference.
Thank you. So guys, we're at 2 hours and I would like to open it up to the students. I know it'd be lovely if you can stay a little longer. If you can't, I completely understand, particularly for you, Akira, it's midnight where you are. So maybe another
1 o'clock.
It's 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock.
But if somebody has something to ask me, maybe I can stay for it.
Maybe we could just do another 15 minutes and if you have to go, please do. If you guys could come back, if you could turn your videos on. so everybody could come back. And there's Jason and Jeff. Is Leslie there? And I know all these people here. There's just McPherson. Oh, there's Jeff.
I'm here.
Okay, great. Jason's video is still off. And Simon, got Terry. Okay, so there's a few more people who just haven't. Oh, there we go. Most people have put their videos on. There's just a couple more.
Not sure if you can see me, but I'm here.
Oh, there you are, Simon. Okay, great. So yes, who would like to maybe come in here? Do a wave. Anyone want to kind of comment even on something that comes up for you about what makes FOT for you, or something about culture and FOT? There's a lot there to digest. So guys, I mean, what it may be is what we're hoping to do is after the panelists leave, we're going to have a break, and then we're going to break into small groups that will give us a chance to talk and focus together about what's come for us. So maybe that will give you just the space and the chance to kind of digest a bit. Oh, Anna. There we go.
Very, very inspiring time. Thank you. We've heard and been touched by many of the things you've said. Something that just came to my mind, since I am a 3-language speaker and I exist almost on everyday basis in 3 languages. I've really noticed something, and I think the English language has that in particular, and I'm very often very touched when I say it out loud, and that's the passive form. So something is needed here if there would be a situation. So we don't have to name neither the situation or me. There is no I and you as nouns, but there is this verbal kind of passive. I'm not very good in grammar. I think it's the passive form in English that I felt that I get to be especially touched with. So I don't know if any other of you working and focusing in different languages have felt like it's like really going in some dimension that is, it's kind of more touched with this passive form than in some active. So it's just an experience that I had. So I don't know if it's, yeah, Akira is nodding. So it does do something to him too. Thank you anyway.
I was nodding because there is no, what should I say? What is needed here? It's not what you think, you know, it has to say. So the felt sense is the subject, and that will tell us what is needed here. And I am not the subject. The felt sense is the subject. So I like that. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe there's more, but just leave it for there.
So what you're saying that there is a subject, but the felt sense is subject. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
I love this phrase, what is needed here. I don't know, for me, it's like, it's a door open and spaciousness, and we get united when I'm with a client or with a person, when I myself come from that place of real interest for that, and not as just the form of something, but if it's really presented in me like that, I really feel this, there's something in energy that shifts. It's like putting my feet into some fluid underneath us, and then everything goes from there, and it's always very powerful. I mean, small things, but this feeling of alignment and something that's like we're very close to some juicy life. And that simple phrase, like what is needed there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Simon, you were.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't know if I don't know if it's a question or a comment. It's something. First of all, yeah, I just wanted to echo what Anna said, that this has been such a rich conversation. There's so much to take in. I think that's why we're all so quiet, because we're digesting it all, as you said, Charlotte. But one thing that did come up for me at the beginning of when we did the attunement, and then I guess again through the conversation, I guess before I heard everything, my sense from the attunement was something about focusing being oriented toward the underlying material of a person's life, or the underlying material of whatever's presenting itself and what's coming up. And I know that's not all of it, but that's just part of how I experience focusing. And so I guess the question or comment that comes up from that, and hearing people talk about how focusing is different from other kinds of therapy, or the ways in which it might enhance or be different from other orientations. The question that comes up is, I guess in a sense, it seems to me like whether or not we call it focusing isn't focusing part of any good kind of therapy, or shouldn't focusing be a part of any kind of good therapy, because it just seems to me difficult. It's difficult to imagine how therapy could be that effective if it's not really creating a space for people to experientially encounter what's giving rise to everything and what's underneath the explicit patterns. And it just seems to me, I guess I'm just interested in what people think about that. Like, is the larger sense of focusing something that necessarily has to be part of therapy, and good therapists automatically do it in some way, or is it something that, or is it different from that? Yeah. And I already got to speak to Lynn about this earlier in the week, actually, because we had a supervision session. So I feel lucky that I got to ask her too. But I'll leave it there and see if there are any comments. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to say that I think that there's a basic talent, or sort of an intuition, that one would need in order to focus if you weren't taught to do it. And my sense is that therapists from diverse schools do that in some way. They happen upon it and begin doing it. And it's interesting that what gets in the way of doing it is training. So if you have a protocol and you have a formula you're supposed to use, and you're well trained and you stick to the protocol, then you won't do things that you don't understand or that you weren't taught. And so that can get in the way.
I just want to add that, am I unmuted?
Yes, you're unmuted.
I just want to add that I showed my class the little video of Gene introducing focusing, and he starts by saying, focusing isn't something I created. Focusing is something natural, and it's there. I just made some little steps so that people could find it more easily. And I think that's important for us to remember, that focusing in the large sense of the word is something that all of us do, that all of us live from. that all of us have that kind of experience, and that what FOT does is sort of sensitize us to it so that we recognize it, so that we can help people find it, so that we can listen for it, so we can welcome it. And in the other home theoretical base that I have, relational self-psychology and relational psychoanalysis, empathy is emphasized in that way that the felt sense is emphasized, and it's really very much akin that we use the language of focusing, and in the broader sense of empathy, it's tuning in to what isn't spoken or is spoken in symbolic ways, to what's under the surface. And I think many approaches have different ways of looking at that, but all therapists want things to arise freshly. All therapists want not just intellectualizations or rationalizations or emoting, but want something new to happen and look for ways for that to occur.
Thank you. Terry.
What?
Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah.
Oh, Sergio.
What?
You wanted to. Oh, Akira. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to say about Gene saying that he did not invent focusing. In Japanese, we have an expression. You tell somebody to place your hand on your chest and ask inside. So that's a kind of a focus.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's a kind of focusing. Mm-hmm. It's always been there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yes, Sergio. Sorry.
I want to add only a little thing, that it's not the same to do focusing and to do focusing oriented therapy. That makes a very big difference for me, and that depends of the culture, the country, and the rights of the social world. So when we do focusing oriented therapy, we should have some purpose, objectives or goals that emerge from the client and therapist's interactions. And I think what's important in the focusing oriented therapy too is that we have an ethic and responsibility. When we do focusing, we do focusing, and it's wonderful. I can have a focusing partner, but it's only to be in touch with the life. That is not, it is a lot of, it's too much, but to do focusing oriented therapy is to make a way with a purpose. And so we have to respond what is happening there. We have, as therapists, we have responsibility. We have to say to the world what is happening, what something is happening. And that make a difference, a very...
Oh, yeah. I think it's time for me to go to sleep. I notice my mind is slowing down. So I've had a wonderful time tonight. So thank you all. Thank you, Charlotte.
Akira.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you very, very much. This has been a wonderful experience.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Good night.
And I wonder, Lynn and Sergio, have one more question and then let you guys go. Terry, I know you were wanting to ask something.
Yeah, actually, so many questions, and Sergio just cleared up something for me, this difference between focusing and being a focusing oriented therapist. So I really appreciate that. But it just occurred to me as Rob and Akira were talking about this lack of protocol, this lack of, not lack, but it just occurs to me that it takes a lot of courage to work this way, because just as the client would like some doctor instructions, for a psychologist to be able to have, or a therapist to be able to have, a protocol to follow, just seems easier and more. I think as humans, we just like instruction. So I think this way of working, it takes courage on both parts, on the part of the client, but I think especially on the part of the therapist. And I'm just really moved by the people that are willing to do that and to stay in touch with themselves and just go into these uncharted waters over and over again. So thank you, and thanks for the discussion.
I think it does take courage, and to me it feels like bungee jumping. I've never done that, but the sense is like jumping off a cliff, and you're trusting that life will take care of you. And so it's tremendously takes a lot of bravery, and there's also a way in which it always works. So life does take care of us, and also, like Sergio's pointing that we have to show that we do something, and I agree with that. That part of the bungee jump is we don't know what's going to happen, but we know that it'll be good, and it's fair to ask for some objective outcome, say in therapy. Like if somebody's been in therapy for a year, we'd expect that they're going to be doing better in some measurable way. And if they're not, I think it's legitimate to ask, what is all this bravery and bungee jumping for? Yeah.
So guys, we'll let our panelists go, and I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your precious Sundays. I know how busy everybody is, and I just feel my heart feels so kind of warm and full. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to give you a chance to maybe say goodbye, and I don't know if anything comes to you to say. Rob, maybe we could start with you.
Well, I'm very grateful to you, Charlotte, and to all of the students that have made this possible, and to the panelists, and to be able to hear from this great panel. And yes, so I'm coming away enriched, and I'm grateful.
Yes, thank you, Rob. And Sergio.
Yes, I want to thank you all, you, Charlotte, and the panelists. And it was a wonderful morning for me. I think that we have done a very good culture interaction of people, and this is wonderful. I am very touched with this encounter. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lynn.
Well, it reminds me and reinforces, not that I really forget it, but what a wonderful community we are. That the body of this community is inspiring and alive, and I love the interactions. And I had a wonderful time being here this morning, and I have so much more to ask and to say. So I hope we do another one.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
It's lovely to see the students.
Yes.
Bye-bye now.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go.
Okay.
Goodbye.